Yes, welcome in. Happy Thanksgiving early, Jesse, for you.
Happy Thanksgiving, Zach, and to all you listeners out there.
And the reason we're throwing that out there is because we will not have a show on Thursday, obviously, because of the holiday. Badgers play Friday. We'll be back this weekend to talk about what happened and look ahead to potentially where Wisconsin might go to a bowl game or potentially all the other things that happen when you don't go to bowl game, or even if you do go to bowl game that is not a very good one, which is the transfer portal. And I know people can't go into the transfer portal until after the the college football playoff is announced, but we know we're going to hear about people. We know we're going to see people saying, "See you later." This is I was here for a few months and now I'm gone. But we'll get that's next week, and we'll talk about that the next time we have a show. But we have plenty to talk about today, as we're going to shove two shows together here. Look ahead to Wisconsin's game against Minnesota and the challenges they're going to face, and then also make our picks for the week. I apologize to begin with, Jesse. I'm not trying to, shove this in your face at all. You told me to pick first last week because you thought I was stealing your picks, and you thought I was just following you. And maybe you should have followed me.
Maybe I should have. I'm gonna fade everything today.
One person went 2-5, the other person went 5-2. Based on our conversation just now, you know which one is which. Just saying. We'll get into those as well, and as we get the final week of the regular season going here. Mike Tressel also spoke yesterday, the final time that we'll get to probably speak with him unless they go to a bowl game, and then also some overreaction or no. Got to get to all of it. Before we do, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. Have the best vintage gear, and they've got a ridiculous Black Friday sale going on right now. 30% off your orders. Ton of Wisconsin stuff up there. Ton of vintage gear across the college landscape. So go check them out, homefieldapparel.com. All right, so let's jump into this. As we were talking before we jumped on the show, Mike Tressel spoke. We weren't sure how much he actually said, especially when you go back and read through the transcript of it. But there were a few things that stood out. I'll let you say if anything for you stood out, and then I'll go ahead and talk about some of the stuff that did for me.
The first question he was asked was about the uneven defensive play, which we've seen all season. They've played very well in huge matchups against Penn State and Oregon, and looked like an absolute tire fire against both Iowa and Nebraska. And I don't think he revealed very much, and he's not typically a guy who's going to give you a ton, though he'll give you some football insight, which I certainly appreciate. But his response essentially came down to, if you let up in intensity or passion or execution just a little bit, then you're going to be in trouble, because there's such a small margin for error in this league that has a lot of parity. And he's not wrong about that. It's just that when you're the defensive coordinator, you're responsible for putting them in the position to succeed. At least that's how I approach it. So I know that this doesn't meet the standard for anybody, this defense. And I was going back through this as I was preparing the preview and predictions for my story about the Wisconsin-Minnesota game. This is one of the worst defenses statistically that we've seen in a long, long time. And yeah, it falls on the players, but it also falls on the guy coordinating the whole system.
So I had somebody, say, come into my mentions and was talking about this defense being horrible. And, when the raw numbers, specifically like yards per game, I think the 2018 team gave up more than this one.
Yeah. I mean, so I was looking for like run defense, for example. And the reason that's the stat that comes to mind right now. But yeah, 2018 was not very good. And if you look at, for example, where they're at run defensively, it's like 92nd in the country, and it's 163 yards allowed per game. And that 2018 team is kind of the only other one here in recent memory that came close. And that's just run defense. So that's not total defense. I think you're right. 2018 was not a
slightly. I think it was like 5 yards worse than this one.
Yeah, and this Wisconsin defense has been saved in part by how it's performed against the pass, statistically at least. But yeah, they haven't been able to stop the run effectively.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they've been good against certain teams that you would think would put up a lot of yards and everything like that on them, and then they go against other teams that should not, and they get torn up. And it's the teams that have the ability to run the ball and are going to be consistent in doing so, and not, do what Oregon did. Now, Oregon ran for over 100 yards as well, but like Minnesota, and Mike Tressel said this, and I think Luke Fickell may have as well, they may not pass once.
I don't believe that for a second, and I can't believe
I don't
said that.
I don't think so either. But when you look at Wisconsin's run defense and you look at what Minnesota does offensively, the same thing that happened I want to go back to the 2018 game where they just ran the read option slants over and over and over, and Wisconsin just couldn't stop it. And PJ Fleck just kept on doing it, or the offensive coordinator at the time just kept on doing it. If they are averaging 7 or 8 yards a carry, it's not going to matter. I mean, they're going to run it, and you're going to get hit with Daniel Jackson on a deep ball and all that good stuff. But like that's what it is. I mean, I know they're going to pass the ball. I get that. But if I were them, I would just run it until Wisconsin could prove they could stop it. Because against power teams, against teams that have NFL talent along their offensive line, which Minnesota does, that's going to be a tough one. We'll get into it when we talk a little bit like what does success look like and make our picks here. But I think you have to be worried about that after what you saw against Iowa and what you saw against Nebraska. And because Nebraska's running game, it's not like it wasn't a very good running game coming in. Like they had struggled, but either way, anything else with Tressel? You talk about the preparation. Isn't that on him?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's I understand exactly where he's coming from. And if you are failing in any unit and you're asked why, there's going to be a multitude of reasons. It's just that ultimately those reasons, I think, fall back on the guy who's responsible for coordinating the defense. But of course, it's also on the players who have not been able to consistently execute at a high level. And that to me is what makes all of this so maddening. Is I know we've talked about, okay, 5-6 isn't great, but it's also the way they've lost that makes you feel like, oh, where is progress actually going to come from? But yet then they do what they did against Penn State and Oregon. So it's like they have it in them to achieve something at a higher level. And that's what is just so head scratching, is why can't you play at that level more often to give this team a chance? Because they had no chance in 2 games that they've not only consistently won against Nebraska, but at least been in against Iowa.
Yeah, for sure. So that is what stood out to you, right? From Mike Tressel. Has been brought up quite a few times by people, especially after games in which they get run on. The Iowa game obviously stands out, and certainly earlier in the year where they're playing 2 defensive linemen and teams are just gashing them in the run. And Mike Tressel was initially asked about it, and he was, they're matching personnel. If they have 3 wide receivers on the field, they're going to have 2 defensive linemen. And if they have 2 wide receivers on there, they're probably going to have 3 defensive linemen. Like they're just matching personnel. That's what that's about. And I understand that. I think everybody gets that. That's what you do. But when you're getting gashed like you were at Iowa or getting gashed at other times of the year, don't you have to make adjustments? Don't you have to be like, guess what? Iowa's not going to throw the ball here. They're not. And if they do, good for them. But they have a backup quarterback who threw a total of 10 passes in that game. And that's not what they're going to do. They're going to run the ball until you stop it. So what do you do? Do you make adjustments? Like, what's his mindset in that? And that's what I asked him. And I'll read it for you. He said, absolutely. So when we did get into a heavy nickel, our heavy nickel involves a 3rd defensive lineman, but it's still structurally looks a little bit more like a 4-down lineman look. In terms of getting truly into the base personnel where you have 3 of those 300-pounders out there with both outside backers, you can do a little bit of that, but quite honestly, some of the adjustments is they can spread you out into 3 and 4 wide receivers, and even empty sets get a little bit more difficult. Those are the mismatches that can happen out there. It's Iowa. Who cares? Right? Like, make them beat you throwing the ball. He goes on to say, if you look at the couple games that we didn't play up to our standard, you can look at, should we have just gotten more mass on the field? And you can point to that. I think there were a lot of times where we weren't schematically at a disadvantage. We need to execute, and the difference is like this. And for those people on YouTube, you can see I'm just making my fingers like very, very close. It's a very small margin. And you've got to believe, and you've got to be able to take punches and not waver. We have great kids. We just need to continue to grow in that area. Again, I was listening. I watched the Manning cast on Monday night, or I should say it was background noise while I was doing something else. And Bill Belichick was on there, and he was being asked about nickel, or, because they played nickel most of the time. That's what everyone plays most of the time, 2 defensive linemen. But like, what if you're getting gashed in the nickel? And he's like, well, then you have to go to the kind of the 3 down linemen and a little overhang, like some of the overhang backers. You have to stop the run. Nothing else matters. If you allow them to run the ball, they're going to run the ball and have advantage over you the entire game. It does not matter. You have to stop the run. That's the most important thing you can possibly do. And that's exactly what, Jim Leonard and Dave Aranda and Justin Wilcox and probably every defense coordinator that's ever lived has said, but Wisconsin's not doing it. They are not stopping the run, and they're getting gashed when they go to those 2 linemen. I went back and looked at the Iowa game like the week after. We kind of talked about it. When they had 2 defensive linemen on the field, they gave up 10 yards a carry. Not great, obviously. When they had 3 defensive linemen, it was 5. Not great, obviously, but one's significantly better than the other. And the other one, if you maybe have mismatches on the outside, I'd rather you have mismatches on the outside against Iowa or teams that may struggle to throw the ball than have mismatches inside and just getting absolutely blown off the ball. Now, again, he says schematically there was not that big of a disadvantage, and he has, again, forgotten a lot more football than I'll ever know. But you have to give yourself the best chance. And he's saying that. He has said that they're giving the people that they're putting out there are the ones that give them the best chance to stop the run and play defense. But when you just keep on throwing the same thing at the board and it's not working, that's I think probably tough for players to see, and also obviously fans having to watch that.
It's one thing to be in this situation against a team like Nebraska because they have a very good quarterback. Even if he's been up and down, you saw what he could do on Saturday where he almost throws for 300 yards. So,
but they didn't make adjustments that one either, right?
But I'm talking about if the decision is 2 down linemen or 3 down linemen, it's like, well, that's not necessarily going to help you if you're not getting pressure, which they certainly weren't able to do. And I don't think adding a defensive lineman would have suddenly made a magical difference there. But the Iowa game it's the outlier here. And it's the one that I think very clearly is most glaring when we go back and evaluate this season. And the Minnesota game may end up being included in that as well. But like you knew what Iowa was about. They had that backup quarterback in Brendan Sullivan who only threw the ball 10 times. And certainly I would much rather be in a spot defensively where you're going to make a backup quarterback who doesn't throw very often beat you by hitting it the wide receivers on the outside, as opposed to they ran the ball 54 times. They have Caleb Johnson. And I said this after the game, that backup running backs looked like Heisman Trophy contenders or Doak Walker Award contenders. And so in retrospect, and even in the moment, it was like, what is happening here? But that's certainly an indictment on the defense, an indictment on the defensive coordinator, and overall just speaks to that this team has not been ready to go and prepared in enough moments that really mattered here this season. Even if you want to look at what happened against Penn State and Oregon, there are 10 other regular season games here, and too many of them they've slipped away because the defense hasn't been good enough.
Yeah, they haven't. And when he's talking about putting another defensive lineman on the field, it's not like you're taking a defensive back off the field. You're still you can still play nickel with 3 defensive linemen on the field. That's not necessarily, and then you just have one less linebacker. I think it's also a problem because they don't necessarily have the bodies up front that they're comfortable playing all the time either, right? James Thompson Jr. at whatever percentage he is, the fact that he's getting thrown back into this because they think it gives them a better chance than playing Brandon Lane or playing some of these other guys screams we don't have the dudes that we need up front to do what we want to do consistently. I think that, would you agree with that?
That is very fair. And I would also say, I can't fault necessarily them for wanting to see what he could offer. Like, this is a dude who started multiple games as a team leader, and coming into the season, we thought was going to have a really good season. But based on what we saw in that Nebraska game, just nowhere near fully ready. It's one thing to practice for a week. It's another thing to get into a game. And when you're dealing with what was a torn pectoral muscle and you're 3 months out from that or whatever, you could clearly see that he didn't have it. And I think both Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel acknowledged that there's you have to as much as you don't want to, you need a guy to work back in and be ready. But yeah, that speaks to exactly the spot they're in, that they just don't have enough up front. And I think, again, and I've said this before, it also comes down to what you're getting out of your linebacker core. And while we saw, at least off the edges, probably the best performance against Oregon, there just has not been enough. There's not enough playmaking ability. And I've said consistently, that is what made the defense so special. Is you go down the list in the last decade of dudes who are now playing in the NFL, and they don't really have that right now. And that's why they weren't able to get any pressure whatsoever on Nebraska.
Yeah, that offensive line did a great job keeping those guys off. They had, you, as you mentioned, they had their best game against Oregon. The outside guys, Leon Lowry and John Pius, and it was back to what it had been for much of the year against Nebraska. So
some would say back to square one.
Some would say that. I wouldn't say that, but I think some would say that. Yeah. Anything else with Mike Tressel at all?
Nah, that's about all we got on what he had to say.
Okay, let's jump into some overreaction or no. And we'll start with the bowl streak is more important than winning the Axe. Is that an overreaction or no?
Overreaction, but obviously they now go hand in hand because Wisconsin has found themselves in this spot. And I asked both Luke and Mike about.
You did?
It's almost like this is the segue because I asked them, but I'm letting the listeners and the viewers know where this is coming from.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. And I didn't ask the question in a way that suggested the bowl streak was more important than beating Minnesota. No, that's not how this works. I just wanted to know whether there'd been any conversations about the meaning of this streak and just what a postseason opportunity can mean moving forward, given the extra practices, all that stuff. And Luke made it very clear that has not been a topic of conversation at all, that what they've discussed since the offseason, fall camp, it sounds like, especially in fall camp when they're all together out in Platteville for a couple of weeks, they have a time where they talk about the history of this matchup, the importance of it. And that stuff matters because now more than ever, you have a roster of dudes who don't really understand what this game is about. That's what matters most, that this is the most important game on the schedule. And he talked about, and he said this before, he said it last year too, a guy coming from Ohio at Ohio State who understands the value of a rivalry, that this is what makes college football special. And Mike Tressel essentially said a lot of the same things. And he said, like, is there a bowl streak on the line? Absolutely. But that's not the focus this week. So it's beating Minnesota. And I think another thing that I thought was interesting is when Mike was talking about Alabama week, he was talking to Hunter Wohler, and it was very clearly a big game. And he said, trying to gauge the excitement level. What do you think about this? How does it compare to Minnesota? And based on how Mike's responded, Hunter told him, like, oh no, this is nowhere close to Minnesota. And why I thought that was at least interesting is because I remember talking to Hunter the week of the Alabama game about this is a game that he was talking about when he was in high school because it had been scheduled 5 years earlier. It was that big of a deal. And yet, even an opportunity to play Alabama is not like what it means to play Minnesota every year.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely not. You're right. And yet we put a lot of focus on the Alabama game and the Oregon game and the Penn State game. But when it comes down to it, if you can win, if you can beat Iowa, if you can beat Nebraska, I guess you throw Nebraska back in because they finally won after 12 years. Congratulations, everybody. And really appreciate all the Nebraska fans jumping into the comments of Monday's show or Sunday's show because somehow you guys think you're not mediocre, which you absolutely are.
No, I think it was that I called them mediocre, and they wanted to say, well, if Nebraska's mediocre, then what's Wisconsin? I'd like to make it clear I never suggested Wisconsin was anything better than mediocre. And in fact, the way that I framed it consistently is it was a matchup of two teams to see who could be less mediocre, and it wasn't even close. So that's where I was coming from.
Yeah, again, a mediocre football team. They're 6-5. I don't know how you can be that's mediocre. And if it's better than Wisconsin this year for sure. There's no doubt about that. Congratulations on that. You stormed the field for gaining bowl eligibility. The great blue blood of Nebraska storming the field after bowl eligibility. Get the hell out of here. So yeah, the axe means more than bowl eligibility. We'll let Nebraska. You can celebrate bowl eligibility with storming the. Come on now, beating a 5-5 Wisconsin team and storming the field because you made a bowl for the first time in 8 years.
To be fair,
how far have they fallen from Tom Osborne and company? It's absolutely pathetic that they were on that field after the game on Saturday.
Yes, but to be fair, it wasn't one of those SEC field storms where it was like wall to wall and you couldn't see anyone. It was a scattering, maybe mostly the student section. Either way, I'm still counting it as a field storm.
Oh, it absolutely was. And then playing jump around as if that's original. Heard it at Illinois, heard it at Minnesota, hear it every freaking time Wisconsin loses on the road. It's maybe outside of Ohio State. Like every team does it. So congratulations on that. Unoriginal and pathetic. All right, moving on. I don't. This one is probably not going to be something that you're going to have a strong opinion on one way or the other, and that's why it's kind of a meek overreaction or no. But there's a chance Mike Tressel is not back next year. Is that an overreaction or no?
A chance? I mean, I think it's an overreaction because I think that he will be back, and maybe some of that has to do with what we've seen at times against quality competition and certainly the relationship that Luke and Mike have. But I said this after the Nebraska game, everything it feels like right now is open. And I can't sit here and say the defense is the thing this program has been able to lean on this year. Like they are not even average in a lot of these categories. So everything is open, but if I have to pick a side, I think he'll be back.
Yeah, I don't think there's a chance that he's gone. I don't. The relationship there is, I think, is too. I wouldn't say tight, but just too long. Like they've been together, they've known each other and been together and worked together in a number of different places. And obviously, the Ohio State tie is there. So, like, it's tough to think that they're going to make a change there. So we'll see. The offensive coordinator, on the other hand, they're going to have to figure that out. And Luke Fickell, because they're going to have conversations. I guess before this is not an overreaction or no, but the Tyler Van Dyke situation and some of the other guys, this situation of whether they're going to be back or not. Jim Polzin asked about Tyler Van Dyke being one of the guys that he had a conversation with earlier in the year, and he's coming along, but he also said he's got some things to think about. What do you think? I mean, the end of that quote, I'm sure you can pull it up. It's like, he's got some thinking to do.
I'm not sure if that's how he said it, but
that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
No, he said, so I'm just going to say what the quote was because it's not particularly long. And you asked Luke about whether there had been conversations with players about what the future holds. And he said it was something they kind of built in to the bye week. And it sounds like in particular, the second bye week, when you get close toward the end of the season, that it was often with the veterans and guys that, it's really important to know what their future is going to be. And then the question specifically about Tyler was whether he'd had talks with Tyler and if that was a realistic option for next season, because we know Tyler will have another year of eligibility given the timing of his injury. So Luke said, I sat down with Tyler. He's got a long way to go. His mindset is he thinks he would like to have another year, but he still doesn't know how well he's going to heal, how fast he's going to heal. He's obviously feeling better and he's moving around, but there's still a long way to go for him. I think those are things that are on his mind. So it wasn't that he's thinking about it. I think it's very clear that if he's going to play somewhere, it sounds like it would be at Wisconsin just because of the situation he's in, the fact that he's already earned the starting job. So there is at least a certain level of trust. The problem is twofold. The new offensive coordinator may have a different plan in his mind, and we don't really know the timeline on how fast you'll be ready coming off an ACL injury. And that really complicates things because you always want certainty at quarterback. But I think based on where Wisconsin is going into year 3 with a new offensive coordinator, you absolutely need certainty. And I don't think they want to be in a spot where they're going in thinking, okay, Tyler's our number one, he's going to be our guy, and you're not sure, because you just can't have that situation. So that's kind of my read on it, is he would like to be back, but there are a lot of things to figure out in terms of his health and who's going to be coaching the quarterbacks in the offense.
So that's the part that Fickell also talked about, because there are, and he said this a couple weeks ago last week when he fired Longo. It's like, it's not about one guy. You're committing. You're committing to. He was talking about recruiting in that moment, but you're committing to what we're building. You're committing and having trust in me that I know where this thing is going, and you can have faith that I'm going to continue on with it. And so he talked about that with recruiting, but he's also got to do that with his own team. He's got to do it with and transfer portal guys. And so I was wondering, if you don't have an offensive coordinator, how's that going to go? And he kind of repeated his answer about, it's important that the quarterbacks and know who's coaching them and that type of thing. But it's also having faith in me that I'm going to know and build and continue to improve the program and my vision for it. So you're buying into that. That's important. It can't be just about one guy. It has to be what you're buying into, the vision for the program. If you were a recruit, would you trust Luke Fickell and his vision and what he's trying to build here?
This is a tough question because it's not what he's essentially saying. It is what he is saying, and what he's been saying is trust me. Trust me that I know what's best for this program, and I know how to move the Badgers forward. And in 2 seasons, if you have that trust, there haven't been any results to show for it. 12-12 these last 2 seasons, 8-9 in the Big Ten. You hired and fired an offensive coordinator, but he's still saying, trust me, because, and perhaps some of it is I've learned from the mistake I made initially, where I have a better understanding and sense of what this program needs. If I was a recruit, it's very late in the recruiting cycle. So you don't want to be in a spot where you decommit and don't know what your options are going to be. You hear this all the time, and I've said this. People say you have to commit to a program and not a specific coach. And that's essentially what Luke is saying right now. Is it's not about who the offensive coordinator is. It's about how I think I can build this program, or how I know I can build this program. And if you've been recruited at this point, you've had conversations with Luke and the entire staff. So I think you have an understanding of what he's about. It is just a hard sell right now, because you're asking for, and he said this before about recruits taking a leap of faith. That's all you have to go on right now, because nothing that we've seen on the field indicates that it's been different, though I understand that people want to give him patience and there is going to be more time. It's a what have you done for me lately business, and the answer so far is not much, other than recruiting at a high level.
Just asking questions.
Asking
questions. We're not. I don't think either one of us have said he can't do it, or he should have done it by now, or it's, like, should they be in a better spot than they are? Did we think he would be in a better spot than they are right now? Yes. I don't think we could say otherwise, but I have not, and I'm still not going to. He gets more time. Like he does. And because of the change that they made, because of what they have gone away from, he deserves time, and he's going to get that time. And I know there's a lot of people that are negative about it, and that's completely fair, because of what was said when they came in and the type of team or the type of program that they talked about having. And then there's people on the other side that are like, have some patience. It was horrible what he took over. And whether you think that's true or not, I think that there's some accuracy to that, the patience aspect of it. So I've been accused of saying, it's why are you not giving him more time and all that good stuff. I'm giving him plenty of time. I'm not calling for him to be fired. I'm not calling for McIntosh to be fired. I'm just saying that there's more time here for them to continue to try and move things forward. It's not going to be ending on Friday, and it's not going to be ending before next year or after, and quite honestly, after next year. Like they have invested so much into this that they're going to give it time, and they should give it time.
I'll admit that I've been very negative here this season, and more negative these last couple seasons than I probably have been in my time on the beat. But I'm basing it on what I've had to watch here for 2 years, as are you. And that is not me saying he can't get it done, but I'm merely pointing out what we've seen and what feels like the concerns moving forward. And I go back to our last show off the Nebraska game, where he doesn't have any answers to the problems that are happening right now. Now, maybe some of that is it's the heat of the moment. You're being asked these questions right after the Nebraska loss. You don't have a lot of time maybe to think about what your answer is going to be. And again, if he had an answer, they'd be doing something different. But this is the most important offseason for him to date. Obviously, getting the offensive coordinator thing situated, but how you build your roster. And if you say, trust me, at a certain point, that's going to run out. You can't keep saying, trust me, if you don't have the results. But Absolutely, he's going to get more time. He's probably going to get at least 2 years, given what it can take to turn a program around from where Wisconsin is and the financial investment Wisconsin has in him. So the hope for them is that what they've been able to build in recruiting, which I give them a ton of props for, very good these last 2 classes, at least on paper. But you have to turn that into production, because I don't think you can rely consistently on, oh, we're going to get 16 transfer portal guys every year, and these are going to be our go-to guys. We've seen there's a couple home runs, but you really have to build from within, and that's what made Wisconsin so good for so long.
Absolutely. And recruiting classes won't get it done. Ask Scott Frost. Like, it doesn't just happen. You can have top 20 classes, top 25 classes, whatever. You actually have to then get those guys to play good football. And that's going to be their challenge here, because they do on paper have the talent coming in to build something better than what we've seen to this point, for sure. So yeah. All right. Let's jump into what success looks like here against the PJ Flex. And they come to Madison, coming off a tough loss. They had a streak. They lost a couple in a row. Then they won several games in a row. And now they've lost 2 in a row, including to Rutgers, which wasn't a great performance by them. And then Penn State, they gave Penn State all they could handle last week. I think this is Wisconsin's favored by 2. It's the smallest they've been favored by since they were an underdog. I want to say in 2005. So it's been a while. It's been a while since this matchup has been this close heading actually into the game in terms of what Vegas sees. But what does success look like for Wisconsin?
Well, since we were talking about Mike Tressel's availability, I will start defensively. It was a interesting comment that he said, and I know that he wasn't 100% believing they're not going to throw the ball at all. But when I went back and looked at what we've seen so far, I would have thought that Minnesota had one of the best rushing offenses in the country based on the way both Tressel and Fickle talked about the Gophers. They're 121st nationally in rushing offense, and they do have a quality running back, but it's not like he's a 2,000-yard rusher or something like that. Max Brosmer, the transfer that they got from the FCS level, New Hampshire, he's averaging 31.6 throws per game this season, and that's 7 more than a year ago when they had Ethan Kaliakmanis. And so Tressel did talk about the way that he can deliver some lasers, and they've got Daniel Jackson and they've got dudes on the outside. So I just thought it was interesting to suggest that Minnesota is this juggernaut on the ground. And obviously that's where it starts. It's what Tressel has preached to this defense, because we've seen too often them not be able to stop the run. And look, if Minnesota is able to get 5 yards of carry, then you just keep going with what works. But I think they're going to pass the ball a lot. I just thought that was really interesting. So to me, it's starting defensively. Okay, how well do you stop the run? But in general, which defense is even going to show up? Because I don't know. This is the third, if you want to say it's the triumvirate of the 3 trophy games, right? They didn't show up at all in the first 2. And they can talk about how important this game is, and it very clearly is, and how much it matters. But I think you would have said the same thing about playing Iowa, and I assume about Nebraska, given that you also had a bowl game on the line there. So I just don't even know which version of the defense we're going to see.
So is it an advantage for Wisconsin then that the temperature is supposed to be what it's supposed to be? They're calling for a high of 25 on Friday, but this game is at 11 a.m. And it's like the real feel high is supposed to be 15 degrees. It is going to be one of the colder days in Camp Randall history. In terms of fans being in the stadium, though, when they played there in December a few years ago, it wasn't horrible.
No,
you know what I mean, like the Minnesota game that they played like the third week of December wasn't bad. But I think like the last truly like cold game that was below 30. I want to say it was the Melvin Gordon game in 2014.
Yes, 2014 against Nebraska. I believe it was 26 degrees at kickoff, which at the time they said was the coldest game since it was 11 degrees against Minnesota in like the 60s. So this is, I think my phone said like the high was going to be 22 or something like. It's going to be the coldest game at Camp Randall, I think, in like 70 years or 60 years. So not very fun, but I guess this is what you get when you live in Wisconsin and play a game that's almost in December. How much is it going to matter? I guess, it's one thing when it's like super windy and you can see the flag flying on top of the goalposts. I don't know if that's going to be the case. So I think Minnesota's just going to kind of do what it does. I don't really know how much the weather is going to impact things. But we'll see.
Yeah, just looking at it, you said 11 degrees, right? 1964 was the 11 degrees. That's the coldest game in Wisconsin history, home or away. Do you remember the 2013 game up in Minneapolis? That was a cold one. That was freezing out there. And then you had obviously the thing after the game with the axe at the goal at one of the goalposts while Minnesota was trying to sing, and there almost was a fight. Gary Anderson and company, almost a fight, and then they ended up taking the axe off the sideline and putting it in the lock. Like, it was just the most ridiculous thing ever. But yeah, it's now they just put it at the goalpost. If they win it, it's the goalpost, and it's fine. But you look at the temperatures that some of these other games have played. 20 degrees, 19. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. Somehow they played a game in September 28th that was 23 degrees in Wyoming. That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so it's going to be cold. Who do you think does that give Wisconsin advantage? Does it give Minnesota advantage? I don't know that there's a huge advantage either way, but no. Like, it's the wind is supposed to be pretty good, right? It's supposed to be like 20-mile-an-hour gusts. So I mean, the wind is going to play a factor in this one. The kicking game is going to be affected by it, obviously, as well. So I think the weather will have a role on Friday morning for sure, and also the crowd. What the hell does the crowd look like?
Ah, boy, the joys of an 11 a.m. Friday game the day after Thanksgiving. I don't know. I really don't know what the crowd is going to look like. I think it's negligible in terms of who would have an advantage. If you want to say it's going to be windy, who would be impacted more? Based on how Tressel phrased it, Brosmer just throws these absolute darts. And if you can cut through the wind and you've got that type of arm strength, then I think you're going to be in better shape than Braden Locke. But again, I don't really know how often Braden's going to be throwing it 40 yards down the field, especially based on the way we saw a lot of their successes. And I know he did have a nice pass down the field to Vinny Anthony, but they both got to play in it, I think, largely negligible.
Well, and Braden Locke does throw it the hardest he possibly can every single time he throws. So he's got that going for him, right? On the other side, can Wisconsin stop the run? And if they can they slow Daniel Jackson? That's obviously a significant key, and we'll see how the kicking game and the special teams plays out as well. We'll make our picks here in a little bit. Anything else you want to touch on before we get into the picks? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the post-game thing at Nebraska.
Yeah, we can do that. I was going to flip it to offensively what success looks like, just because this is going to be the second game with this new system. And I mean, couldn't have asked for a better job than what they did against Nebraska, given the circumstances. So I wonder whether there's some things they feel like they can build on with a little more time. They did feel like they were able to have more success with some motions and shifts. And I think Braden really thrived in a situation where more was on his shoulders. He talked about that after the Nebraska game, just how much he appreciated having that type of opportunity. And clearly the teammates responded to him, but they've got to be able to run the ball, I think. You could say that any game, but I think they really need to be able to establish something. Here's what's interesting to me is while Minnesota is only 6-5, they have on the whole been a very good defense. They're top 12 nationally, I think, in total defense. They're 15th in scoring defense. And Wisconsin's played 4 other teams that rank in the top 15 in scoring defense, and they are 4 of the team's losses. The only one that isn't among them is USC, which doesn't have a top 15 scoring defense. So, I look at that and I think that's going to be a problem, because when they play real stout physical defenses, they seem to have trouble running the ball consistently. And then you're in a spot where it's 3rd and 9 and you're asking Braden to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, when they played the game, Rutgers was considered a good defense, but it has proven not to be the case, obviously. They were dealing with some injuries, but yeah, Wisconsin has had success, it's been a little tough. What do you think about, and I said this during the game, and maybe I said it on the show, more Darian Dupree?
Mm-hmm. I think some of it has to depend on what's happening in the game. Tawee is going to get the first snaps. He's clearly the number one guy, and he does run with good physicality and burst. And if they feel like they've got something going with him, then you want to keep that going. I mean, the distribution of carries is going to be that Walker gets more. But let's say he's having some trouble and Darian gets out there and he's getting 6 yards a carry or 7 yards a carry, which he's done twice here in the last 3 games. I think you have to go with, at this point, who you feel like is going to give you a better chance for success. But it depends on how Minnesota is defending and how they're how they're handling each of those running backs. But those are clearly going to be the guys that they roll with, just those two, no one else.
Yeah. Before we move on, I probably should have thrown this in earlier in the show. The post game scene between as Luke Fickell was walking off with Casey Raubach and his security, and former Badger center and current Nebraska offensive line coach Donovan Raiola. It appeared there was some exchanging of words there. We obviously don't know what was said. Some people that I spoke with said. It was a good game. Luke Fickell said he had no idea what it was, that it was even a thing. His communication people told him right before the press conference yesterday that it might come up, and it was the first question he was asked. But he's like, I have no idea. Maybe he said something to me, maybe he said something to somebody else. I have no idea. But then you have the cop running after him and grabbing his arm, Donovan Raiola's arm for that matter, and Donovan Raiola was apparently, Matt Rule said that Raiola told him that it was no big deal. So a whole lot of not very good answers here. I think the only person that we truly, truly need to hear from, and maybe we will by the time you're actually listening to this, is the police officer with UWPD. Like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that? Go and run after him and put hands on him like that? I talked to some friends in law enforcement, and I don't think you even need a friend in law enforcement to know that you shouldn't be doing that if you're that officer, unless something more that we don't know is involved here. But yeah, it was made out to be a big thing. I'm not gonna double down, but I'm certainly not going to backtrack. Donovan Raiola, it does not surprise me in one bit that he would be involved in something like that. He never shied away from talking or being a little bit extra on the field. And if he said something, or if he was, it just makes sense. I mean, that's who he is. And that's not a shot at him. It's just who he is. Some of us like conflict. Some of us, feel the need to say something that they shouldn't. I'm definitely one of those people. I say stuff I definitely should not. This earlier in the episode, some of the things I said about Nebraska, shouldn't have said it, but I did. Donovan Raiola is a very good offensive line coach, and he's done a solid job there. He was a fine Badger. People loved what he did at Wisconsin with some of the extra stuff that he did. They loved that attitude. It was not a shot at Donovan Raiola. Just wasn't. Anything?
One big nothing burger to me. I couldn't care less about this unless there was something that actually happened, and it's unclear. And if it was just some words, like, who cares? You hear a lot worse from the dudes playing on the field during the game.
Yeah. All right, let's get into our Week 14 picks. As I said earlier, big week for Zach. Last week went 5-2. Jesse went 2-5, which gives me a 2-game advantage heading into the final week of the regular season. We may have to do some bowl picks if I fall behind here this week. But otherwise, do you want me to go first again?
I don't care. I've crapped this thing down my leg. I'm pretty sure I had a lead since week 1. This is like storming out to a 28-0 first quarter lead and then looking up with 2 minutes left in the game and somehow being down 31-28. That's what's happening right here.
Yeah, agreed, totally. All right, Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl, taking on Ole Miss. Ole Miss coming off a loss. They are 26-point favorites in this game. Mississippi State's not good.
How does Ole Miss respond from being in position to get to the playoff and then, much like me, crapping it down their leg last week? 26 is a lot, but I think they're going to be mad, and maybe they'll have something extra to play for. So I say Ole Miss covers at home.
I'm going to go with that one as well. Texas, number 3 in the country, going to Texas A&M. Aggies also coming off a bad loss, a loss that they should not have had, losing to Florida. And it puts them what?
Yeah, just some big time college football playoff implications for this one. This is kind of like this is the game of the week.
I mean, Texas needs to win.
Yeah, I think I like having 6 points to work with. I'll go A&M at home.
I will as well. I believe it's the first time they played in quite some time, since Texas A&M went to the SEC, and then the rivalry fell off. But Auburn and Alabama. Bama's an 11.5-point favorite there. Alabama coming off a game that they probably would like back.
You want to talk about a field storm? How about Auburn?
Yeah,
it's just a random aside, but I kind of hate the overtime rule that they have in place, where it's just a bunch of 2-point conversions. It's like, anyway.
That was who Texas A&M lost to. Yeah. I got that mixed up. Florida beat.
Yeah, I mean, Iron Bowl.
Florida beat Ole Miss. What am I doing? Sorry.
I don't know. I guess I'll go Alabama, even though the Crimson Tide, it turned out, were not very good by their standards.
Yeah, I mean, 11 is a big number, but Auburn not very good. I'm going to go with Alabama as well. Purdue.
How am I supposed to make up ground here if we keep having the same pick?
Again, I asked if you wanted me to go first.
Okay, this one's on me.
Purdue at Indiana. The Hoosiers are 29.5-point favorites in this one.
This is an unbelievable spread, except that Purdue is horrible, and Indiana has its best team in a long time. Hell, I'm just going to say the Hoosiers cover.
I was going to go with Indiana as well. Do you want me to pick Purdue here just for you? No?
I want you to give your honest assessment.
Indiana needs to win this game and win it impressively. There's a lot of people that are going to try and keep them out of the playoff after losing the way they did at Ohio State. They have played literally nobody else. I guess Michigan might be their best win might be their best win. So Purdue is definitely not going to be their best win, but 29.5, got to make it impressive. It's got to be one of these Ohio State, Wisconsin Big Ten championship game 2014 things to really make people understand how good you are. So we'll see if they're able to do it. Nebraska going to Iowa. It is a night game on Black Friday. The Hawkeyes 5.5-point favorites.
I'm a believer in Nebraska after witnessing the students storm the field. I think they are going to cover.
Really?
I don't know. What do I know? I obviously barely have a winning record here, but I need to make up ground, and I think you're going to pick Iowa, so I'm going with the Huskers.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Iowa here. I don't think Nebraska is I don't think they're any good. They are mediocre. And is that better than Wisconsin? Absolutely. But we've seen Wisconsin do Wisconsin things at Iowa and at Nebraska. And I don't know that Wisconsin necessarily played great last week. Would you agree with that?
You don't know that Wisconsin played great?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think they necessarily played great.
It was not Wisconsin's finest hours.
Okay. All right. So Nebraska still mediocre, at Iowa slightly better than mediocre. Night game. I mean, it's a rivalry game. Obviously, I'm going to take Iowa. Michigan at Ohio State. Buckeyes 21-point favorites in this one. They have not beaten Michigan for a little bit here.
Ohio State's going to put it on Michigan. They're going to take advantage of a weak dog and roll over them. Any chance
it's like a 1-score, 2-score game?
Of course.
But you're going to take Ohio State anyways?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go Ohio State as well. Minnesota at Wisconsin. The Badgers favored by 2. They have won 17 of the last 20 matchups, but it's been a little bit more even since 2018.
I've watched too much of this season, and I don't think Wisconsin gets it done. I think Minnesota is going to win. Wisconsin hasn't lost at least 5 games in a row since, I think you said this before, 1991 in Barry Alvarez's second season when they lost 6 straight. I think it comes down to, for me, how much can I trust this Wisconsin team? And sure, you can say the same thing about Minnesota because the Gophers have just lost 2 consecutive games, but it's a very solid defense. That gives me some concern. This team doesn't seem to have any answers, and they haven't done anything meaningful this year, so why start now?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously significant question marks in terms of who's going to play as well. It seems unlikely that the way Jake Chaney left last week's game that he's going to be able to play. Hunter Wohler's still unclear as he deals with a head injury. You have, obviously, Will Pauling. Is he going to play? He's tough as hell, so I would assume he's going to try and give it a go. But they have a number of guys like that, and it leaves you a little bit uncertain of exactly who's going to be out there and are they going to be motivated? Because as you said, it is not necessarily a team full of Wisconsin guys everywhere up and down the line. And that doesn't mean that other people outside of the state don't understand the rivalry, but it's a little bit different. And so that gives you a little bit of pause. But if you think for 1 second that I'm going to pick PJ Fleck and his Gophers to come into Madison and win and have to see that tool bag, grab the axe, and surf into the locker room once again, it's not going to happen. Not a chance in hell. Wisconsin wins, they cover, and they get to 6-6, and they go to a bowl game, and we don't have to hear PJ Fleck
Okay,
talk about this and that and this, and this and that and this. Absolutely not. Not a chance.
We got 2 games different, so there's a chance here we'll be tied going into bowl season. But given how things have happened here, it's probably not. So I'm sure you'll go undefeated this week. But it's another interesting one between these 2 teams, both once again mediocre.
Yeah, man. Careful now. Don't want that large Minnesota fan base getting in here and pumping up our numbers at all.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. So what are you going to say?
Well, I just think, these guys have said the right things all year, and they've talked about the importance of this. And I have no doubt that it is as important as any game all year. It's just that just because you say something doesn't mean it's going to happen. That's kind of how I feel about the way this season has gone. And I think it's a valid point you're making about dudes who just don't really know as much about this rivalry. And I don't want to get it too much into that, but it is interesting. Braden Locke's talking after the game about how important it is to the state and the program. And he's absolutely right. And I don't doubt he doesn't. I mean, he knows the importance of it. He's never played in this game. He's from Texas. I find that fascinating, the way that the roster has changed, but that could be a conversation for another day.
It could be. Again, you say they've said all the right things. Jake Chaney, after the Oregon game, coming out and saying, we haven't won a single big game in my entire tenure, and I'm going to leave here without having won a big game, would suggest that some don't always view this as a big game. And I also don't, and this is not really a big deal, but Luke Fickell's been asked the last 2 years, have you brought anybody in to talk about the rivalry? Because that's what Barry would do, and that's what, the last few coaches have done. And he's like, I don't really bring people in. We talked about it back in fall camp, and we spent time on it in fall camp. I don't like that. I feel like you should have somebody come in and explain it, whether it's Casey Robach standing up in front of the entire place and talking about it, or a former player coming in and talking about it. There's nothing wrong with hammering home the importance of it and making it clear of what exactly it means. And I just feel like while Fickell and other people can stand up there and talk about it, they don't really truly know.
Yeah.
That, you know what I mean? Like Fickell knows Ohio State, Michigan. He gets that, and he understands the importance of it, and because he lived it. I think having people up there talking about it that lived it and don't want it to be in their hands, like it has to be at that level of importance. Again, it's not a huge deal. I just think spending time on it 3 months ago and not hammering it home this week constantly and having somebody in there explaining it to people that don't know, it feels like a missed opportunity. But again, I'm probably making too much of it.
I don't know that you are. I mean, what he said was he'd rather have someone like, and he used by name, Aaron Witt, a guy who's been a part of it, who's in the program, that is a leader and people respect, talk about it. But it is an interesting dichotomy, and maybe we'll look back whenever the Luke Fickell era ends about if it didn't go well. I think there's this expectation, because things have kind of always been the way that they've been for 30 years, and Luke's doing something differently, and it's not wrong necessarily, but it is different. And when things don't work out, you start to look to that. And this is just another one of those things, because what has Wisconsin done over time? They are things that have mattered to people here, and you're slowly changing things. And a lot of that, I mean, it's a different staff that doesn't have ties here. The roster is completely different from the way that it's ever looked, which we've talked about before. So if you're going to make changes, though, it better work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Jesse, have a great Thanksgiving. Everybody else out there, have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll be back after the game.
Happy Thanksgiving, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.